Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Shergroup on the Sofa. I hope wherever you are in the world that you're in a good place and that the sun is shining, maybe. As we always do on Shergroup on the Sofa, we always say hello to our number one fan. And I have Charles Stevens with me here today, who knows Ross. So,
Hi, Ross.
Hey, Ross, how you doing? As you know, Charles is a great West Ham fan, but we won't hold that against him. We're Norwich City fans. He's not going to comment on that.
No.
Okay, well, we'll get off the subject of soccer because we're actually here to talk about something pretty serious, which is for our landlord community today. So if you're a landlord and you're out there in England and Wales, and maybe we'll touch on Scotland as well, we've got our resident property expert here in Charles, who's building a big Twitter following, making comments about what is happening in the world of the law relating to landlords, and really how he can help you feel more comfortable as a landlord, perhaps in the months ahead. Obviously, you can't change government policy, but he's certainly got some very good views about the changes in the law. So let's kick off then. Now, this abolition of the no-fault evictions and the loss of Section 21, Charles, what's it all about?
Well, basically, as you know, and probably everybody out there knows, if you've got a nice short-term tenancy, which most tenants do have now, there are two ways in which you can evict them. One's the Section 8, which is where the tenant's done something wrong, and there's a number of grounds you can get them out on with different notice periods. And then there's what's called the no fault Section 21 process, which is the tenant doesn't have to have done anything wrong. Their fixed term has expired. The fixed term has been 6 months or more, and you can serve the tenant with 2 months' notice, and you don't have to give a justification for that. And the tenant's meant to leave after 2 months. The government have decided, for whatever reason, that that's unfair. So what they've said is, we're going to do away with this no fault eviction, so you cannot get tenants out without justification. And that's how it's been sold. All the media headlines and all of the leasehold reform, and basically everyone is reading the headline and believes, oh, that's it, landlords are not going to be able to evict a tenant unless the tenant's done something wrong. That's how it's sold. Now, my feeling is, from day one, that's just not possible. It's not going to happen. They cannot do that. And the more that it's come along, there's more caveats to it. But that's basically what the Section 21 abolition was about. The way I see it, I can go on, is they couldn't do that. That's just not possible to do, because effectively what you're doing is you're saying to landlords, you can never get possession of this property, except that the problem, well, unless you wanted to move back into it. But what my concern is, for example, there's so many people out there that see property as the way of protecting your money. And that's right, they're not making any more land. Up until right now, where interest rates are so high that you've got more money, you've got more interest putting money in the bank than you have buying land at the minute. For decades, it's been a case of, if you want to make money, put it into land as opposed to leaving it in the bank. So people have used it as a pension pot. So if you're then saying to people, you can never get your tenant out, all these people that have used properties for the last 20, 30 years, thinking that is going to be how they're going to have a pension pot at the end of it, won't be able to realise that asset. They won't be able to sell it without having that tenant in it, which may impact on the value. So I've always looked at, that just can't happen. They will allow landlords to sell, which is effectively what's happened. And they have now made a caveat that says, well, okay, you can actually sell. If you can get a tenant out as long as you follow a certain process, if you need to sell the property, which is right.
Okay. So, I mean, that was always going to be the situation, really. I mean, a landlord that's got a good tenant in there, unless they want the property back for themselves, why would they want to get rid of that tenant anyway?
Do you know what? This is the whole problem that I have with the idea that they brought this in. And to be honest, it's my problem with the whole idea why everyone thinks that this is a massive issue, that landlords can get tenants out for Section 21 for no fault. How many landlords are there really in this country that kick a tenant out for no justification? By implication, these landlords want someone in that property. They are letting it out because they want to make money. So
Yes.
there are very few of them that are going to serve a notice on a tenant to get them out without having a justification. So, and those justifications are obviously under Section 8. So it'd be non-payment of rent. So they can do all of those things. I'll tell you what I think where I think this whole thing falls down is the government. If you look at the government's reasoning behind abolishing Section 21, it's because what they've said is there's such a rise in Section 21 applications to the court, right? So they're saying that all these tenants effectively don't want to leave because they've been asked to leave at the end of their term. They haven't. So we've had the Section 21 notices served on the tenants. The tenants haven't left. So the landlord has had to make an application to the court to get them out. And because there's a rise in those, they're saying, well, tenants are being forced out of their properties. But what they're failing to acknowledge is the reason that the tenants are having to stay in the properties and not agree to go is because they cannot get on the housing list with the councils unless they are forced out. So effectively, the local authorities are saying, we are not going to house you unless you are evicted. So the tenants are having to make the landlords take the matter to court to get them evicted so they can go on the housing list. So the government's attitude and the local authorities' attitude is actually forcing an increase in Section 21 applications. It's nothing to do with the fact these tenants don't want to leave. These tenants would leave, I think. So I don't actually think this abolition of Section 21 is going to do anything. I don't think it's going to help the tenants. It will do something, I believe, to the market, which is actually pro-landlord. But I do not think this is any good for the tenants whatsoever.
So really, this whole use of Section 21, I mean, it sounds to me like it's been overused or it's been used for the wrong reasons. I mean, having a reason for a tenant to be rehoused under a local authority that wants to leave. I mean, surely that's not the correct use of Section 21 anyway.
No, it's not what it was there for. I mean, if your house, it's the landlord's house. If they want to gain possession of that property, why should they have to tell you their reason why? In times like this, for example, people are worried about money. People are worried about, how they're going to afford to live. If you've got a house which has got any equity in it, you may see now as the time to cash in. Yeah. And I mean, if people are cashing in, it's through desperation, not through they need to, because house prices are not going up at the minute. So if someone wants to sell their property, why should they not be able to get the best price for it? And if they feel that they're getting the best price for it is having it vacant, then they should be able to get the tenant out. You can't, it would be so unfair not to allow them to do. I mean, but the use of Section 21, well, the way in which it's having to be used, or the tenants are having to use this system, is not the way it was intended. But it's through no fault of their own. No. Because I say, these people, they cannot get on the housing list, and that's what they want. And I know that the government and local authorities are under pressure with housing and what have you, so they don't want to just put people on the housing list. But for them to then use that as a justification for a change in legislation is wrong.
Yes, yeah, I understand that. Well, getting onto housing lists is a hell of a job now. Yeah. That is something that government should dig deep into about, housing people and making that, an easier process than it is at the moment, because it's a complete lottery, isn't it, in terms of where you live in the country.
It really is, and you do feel sorry for these people, because it isn't through any fault of their own.
No.
But I mean, I'm going to digress here because it's off of Section 21. But what I would say is, I mean, I'm not saying that I could solve the housing problem in this country. I mean, I'm sure you've got faith in me that I could. But in my maybe, yeah, okay. But I mean, my view is, if you look at the planning policies, it's all very well. I know they're changing planning policies now, and they're making it a lot easier for people to get planning in areas that they weren't at the moment. But these things, the housing, the only way, and this isn't going to solve it, but it will certainly help, is if they start making houses for what is necessary. And I don't mean the number. I'm talking about the size. Because if you look, I read somewhere that the average, the households, statistically over the last 50 years, the size of households hasn't actually changed that much. I think it's something like 45% are 2 adults and a child. 35%. It might be, no, might be 35% is, no, yeah, it was about 45% is 2 adults and a child. About 40% is 2 adults and 2 children, and 20% is above, or something along those lines. Yeah, the majority of houses, I think they built a housing estate in Derbyshire in, I might be about 5 years ago, and I think only 10% was 2 bedrooms. Now, so that means there's all this land. I know people want bigger houses, and if you can afford it, why not? But the problem is, the country is only a certain size, and they're building these 5-bedroom houses that are being housed by a couple and a child. It's like, you know, unfortunately, as much as everyone would like these massive houses and these gardens, we've got to start looking at what society needs and what the country needs, and not what the individual needs, and then start building towards that. Stop allowing people to build these massive 5-bedroom houses on estates where it's not necessary in the area. And you know, developers' argument will be, yeah, but we get more money for the 5 bedrooms. Yeah, you might do, but the fact of the matter is, you will get you will get less money, yes, but there'll be a lot more properties, obviously, if they are smaller. And also the councils, they can impact on that. Then they can basically maybe not take as much as a Section 21, a Section 106 contribution, and because there's not going to be so much infrastructure potentially. Honestly, it's the only way, unless and until they start building for what is necessary, as opposed to what sells. Because the fact of the matter is, the smaller properties will sell if there aren't the bigger ones. You know, and that's what they've got to start doing. Anyway, sorry.
Well, no, but I can see your point. I mean, the fact is that the way we live our lives, and maybe this is a post-pandemic trend, but I think it's been going on for a little while, is that we don't need as much space. And families are, as you say, we're not increasing the size of families, and I haven't got any data for that for today. But my gut feel is that the way that the modern family lives and operates, compared to how my mum and dad lived,
yeah,
you know, is very different. I mean, for example, you know, a formal dining room area has probably been turned over into an office, you know, a home office now, and just, you know, getting on board with the size and the footprint of how people live their lives, and you know, and particularly for youngsters who need to get a foot on the ladder or need to move out of home and want to set up their own space. I mean, you know, it's amazing to me how younger people can live in a very shall I say, compact environment very comfortably. You know, they've got their devices, and they've got their, you know, they've got their apps, they've got their social media, they're online, and they just live their life entirely differently to the way that older generations have lived. So there's a lot to be said for tuning in the housing resource to the way that we live our lives as modern Britain. You know,
definitely. I mean, and the thing is, it's like, you're right. And the funny thing is, part of the, up until the pandemic, I think the youngsters, and most, you know, I can't even class myself in that anymore, unfortunately. But the youngsters will look at, you know, they, as you say, they could live in a small space because their lives were about not being in the house, whereas maybe generations before was about spending time in the house with the family. Whereas now a lot of the people want to go out. They want to, you know, if you're near London or Cambridge, you want to be out. The problem that the pandemic has potentially caused is that all these people that were locked up in flats in London, now they're screaming out for space. And so, you know, they are pushed towards, well, do we want bigger areas? So that's a little bit, that's a sad thing. And hopefully that doesn't happen, because it's not really what's necessary, whether or not we can go back to what we were like. But I do think you're right. Times have changed and we haven't. And the thing is, it's not like people's wages have changed enough to support these big houses, even if we did have the land. They haven't. So, you know, it's not that people can afford more. Like, so that, you know, their wages have got so high that everyone can afford a 5-bedroom house, so that's what we should be building, and we've got the land for it. It's not that. It's the fact that we're allowing people to buy 5-bedroom houses regardless of what they earn. So that's where we've got to in this point. But I mean, that's the only way I think that would help with the housing. But what do I know?
Well, what I do see with landlords, just bringing it back to that,
please.
I see landlords being, you know, incredibly creative with space. I was looking at something on, I think it was Facebook the other night, an HMO, where a landlord had done a beautiful conversion job of a large property and actually created I think 5 or 6 little homes out of, you know, a very large property, which was great to see, and decorated it beautifully. And it was, you know, I mean, whoever gets to live in that, yeah, a
Yeah.
great little space, if that works for you. So I think there's a lot of creativity in the landlord community around how to, yes, create an investment and then to develop that investment. But what I think our landlord community is seeing is kind of their world being impacted, adversely impacted by government policy, which doesn't really stack up. So if they do get away from Section 21 no fault evictions, I mean, it's just going to come under another justification, isn't it? I mean, it's just going to be packed up a different way.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what I would say first off, with you saying about our landlords and their ingenuity. They are. And I think for whatever reason, making money is a bad thing. That's all there is to it. Do you know what I mean? This chap who you're talking about, who's, you know, made these properties that are great. People won't be looking at that and saying, how wonderful is this? Look at the facilities he's providing to the tenants. What a great idea. They will be looking at it. They'll be saying, you know, someone will moan, he's making too much money. It's because it, you know, and it's just making money. Capitalism is a bad word, apparently. But all this legislation change where people like him are being caught up, and all these like good landlords, the ones they're targeting or trying to target are rogue landlords, apparently. But my review is, if a rogue landlord is a rogue landlord, I doubt they've been complying with the law previously. So why are they going to comply with the law now? So it's not going to impact them at all. But with our landlords now and how this is going to impact them, I see this being a good thing. And I'm happy to say this. And I've said this, I know you know. I've said this from day one. And everything I read was the complete opposite. But I mean, I can be quite forthright, as you know, but I really was. I just could not see how this wouldn't be a bad thing. And my view of it was, well, like just looking at the market. And I was thinking, okay, so they're saying if we abolish Section 21, we're not going to, if it was in their true meaning of what they've said, which is, you know, you can't get people about with no fault. If it had been that, then that's a problem. But now they've brought in all of these caveats saying things like, you can sell, for example, like what we're saying here. But what they've said is the intention is you can sell if if it's going to be exactly the same as Scotland, because Scotland have already got this in. And it says you've got to have an intention to sell. Right? What is an intention? You know, and you think, and you basically, it's as simple as instructing an estate agent or instructing a solicitor in Scotland. Now, if we follow that, all someone would have to do to circumvent and get the ground to get the tenant out is instruct a solicitor and an estate agent. Yeah. That's all they have to do. Yeah. And then basically, the funny thing about that is the tenant can leave, but I think they said something like, I can't remember the percentage now off the top of my head, but a large percentage of properties where that had happened in Scotland were still not sold a year later. So it just goes to show how, you know, what they're bringing in really for the landlords, for whenever a landlord, as we were saying earlier, a landlord's only going to want possession if they're going to go into possession, which is one of the grounds, or if they want to sell. All the other ones, if the tenant's been a bad tenant, blah, 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 you can still get them out. But those are the only two reasons that a landlord would actually want a tenant out for no fault. Yeah. Those are still included. So it's not actually going to have any impact, I don't feel, to the landlords in that way. Where it will have an impact on the landlords in a positive manner is, I think, rents are going to increase. And I said this at the start. And if you now look at the rents, I think it said Manchester and London have got the highest rents they've ever had. And they're not stopping. And they're talking about putting caps on rents because it's going up that much. And this is all because of this, what the government have done. Because what's happened is landlords, in my view, have been ill-advised, have gone, well, if Section 21 is getting abolished, I've got to get my tenants out. So they're trying to get their tenants out, and then they're going to sell, and they're taking those out of the buy-to-let, then the letting market. So that means supply is going down. But the intention of what the government is doing and the way they're selling it is that this will give the tenants a little bit more security. Yeah, because you won't be able to get them out so easily. Which whether or not it does, I doubt for what we said earlier. But if it did, and even if people believe that, if you say to someone that you're getting more security, what's going to happen to the rent? The rent is going to increase. Exactly the same that happens in the commercial market. If they've got a right to renew, rents are higher. So you're pushing up the rents because you've got you've got less houses. So the supply's gone down, but demand at least stays the same. People can't get mortgages at the moment because the interest rates are too high, but they still want to move out of their parents' house. So demand for rented accommodation has gone up. So by doing this Section 21 at this time when the market is the way it is, I think supply is reducing because of Section 21. Demand for rented is increasing because people can't afford the mortgages, and they also see that Section 21 abolition is a good thing. It's got to push the rents up. So one of the other justification the government had for abolishing Section 21 is that they felt that landlords may use at the end of a fixed term the possibility of serving a Section 21 as a way of increasing rent. And tenants don't like to renegotiate the rent because what they say is they'll say to the tenants, well, if you don't give me an extra £500, I'm going to serve you a Section 21 and get someone else in. Let me tell you for a start, that very rarely happens. Most landlords that have got a good tenant don't charge the market rate. I've just had one that had a tenant in there for 10 years. She never increased her rent. And that's because the tenant paid on time. She said, I didn't mind. So why run the risk? But with what the government are doing, my view is they don't have to worry. These tenants will no longer have to worry about whether or not the landlord will try and artificially inflate a rent at the end of the term by threatening them with a Section 21, because they're not going to be able to afford the rent on day one because the rent is going to be so high. It's just, it doesn't work whatsoever. I honestly don't think it does.
Well, it's a conundrum for government, a difficult one, because people need housing and they need to be able to, they need somewhere to live, and all the way round in the UK, this has been a short-termist policy, which hasn't been given, and this is a policy, housing, that needs decades of consideration. You've got a crystal ball gaze 20, 30, 40 years. Of course, that longer term thinking has just been scuppered and continues to be scuppered by crises such as that pandemic, and now this energy crisis that and the people that are losing out are not government officials or ministers. They are, citizens, whether they're on the landlord side or the tenant side, who are trying to make their way in life with whatever resources they can achieve. And I don't think there are any winners here. And I do understand what you said earlier in the interview about landlords using housing as a way to build up their pensions, which of course they need to do, and why shouldn't they? And that's all very valid. We want to see landlords in a good place. I mean, one of the things that, and it's not directly on Section 21, but it always surprises me when we get a lot of landlords now through our platform coming to talk to us about, their situation, and they book a half-hour clinic appointment with you, don't they, just to have a chat. That's proving to be very successful because you're able to review their paperwork. And it always surprises me how many landlords you talk to where however they set their tenancy up, it's not compliant. It's failing, and you've almost got to scrap it and start again. I mean, you see that a lot, don't you?
I do, and the problem is, it's the same as absolutely anything, isn't it? Everyone thinks we're all going to get on, it's all going to be fine. No one goes into an agreement thinking it's not going to be good. Why would you go into the agreement otherwise? But the problem is that landlords, whether or not it's bad advice or whether or not it's because it's what they've always done, they tend to either, just unfortunately, a lot of them do it on the cheap. They do it themselves, But the amount of times you see that it is just wrong. But the problem is they only find out it's wrong when they can't do anything about it. Yeah. And then they've come to us, and a lot of my thinking is, well, I'll have to go back to them and I tell them that if they've served the notice, I might have to say the notice is invalid. But then that's like, well, okay, if the notice is invalid simply because, like I had one this week, they spelt the name wrong. Okay, if the notice is invalid because of that, worst case scenario, all right, you've lost a couple of months. We'll have to reserve it, or we rely upon the court just ignoring it, or the tenant and not raising it as an issue. But then you've got the worst ones, which are the things like you haven't got the gas certificates and you never had the gas certificates, or you haven't registered the deposit right, or what happens a lot you see is you've granted someone a renewal tenancy and you haven't re-registered the deposit. Now that has actual implications that you cannot get out of them. So, like for example, when a fixed term ends, if a fixed term ends, they go into a periodic tenancy, but you may grant them another tenancy. If you grant them another tenancy, you have to re-register that deposit. If within 30 days and serve them with the notices, the tenant information, deposit information. If you don't do that, you are liable for up to 3 times. You are, in order to give us valid Section 21, you have to give them the deposit back, and you are liable for a penalty of up to 3 times. And that is not whilst the tenancy is in place. If the tenant moves out, they could still come back to you for up to 3 times.
3 times
That's what happens. 3 times the deposit. So you could effectively, you would have to give them back the deposit to serve the Section 21, which is effectively, if you wanted to serve a Section 21, you gave the tenant the deposit back, they're going to think, why have they given me the deposit back? And they're going to look into it. And then they're going to say that you want them out. They're not going to be massive fans of yours at that point. And if they find out that they can get 3 times, potentially 3 times deposit, who's not going to make that claim? And that's all for the landlord maybe saving. How much would I charge? I don't know. To set it all up, probably charge about £800, probably.
Yeah.
To save £800, they may well have lost a couple of months for serving an invalid Section 21. The security of having a deposit might be a £2,500 deposit, and up to £7,500, 3 times the penalty of the deposit. So by saving £1,000 potentially at the outset, they are risking 10 grand, maybe. And not only that, as you know, like with our online storage systems and what have you, once someone instructs me, that's it. We've got a Bible then of everything that they've got. So if they ever have a problem with the tenant, there's none of this me saying, right, well, can you let me have these documents, da, 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 da. They just contact us and they just say, I want this person out. Where you go to their Bible of documents, we know everything in there is right. So it's literally the process of dealing with their issues becomes, a couple of hours as opposed to a couple of weeks while they're searching around in their cupboards and whatnot for all the documents that I've asked for. And then we're trying to just decide whether or not the deficiencies in the documentation we can still proceed with. So there's that.
I think that's really important. I mean, again, we've opened up Shergroup Legal into this arena, and Charles has joined us to help our community of property owners and landlords, because obviously we historically have done the eviction side of the equation, but we're helping more and more private individual landlords or landlords that have a portfolio of private property, because they need the support. And so we're able to now to really help landlords, aren't we, with a complete package, going through from the time that they want to let a property out all the way through to the time you want it back. And that just, broadens our ambit. And I think, talking to letting agents and other property professionals, there's a need for this in the market. There's a need to have a complete umbrella over the entire process, because for landlords, you're taking a huge risk in buying a property or allowing a property to be let out, and going to a solicitor with Charles's experience, and it may not be Charles, it may be a solicitor that you've already used, and there are plenty of solicitors out there. But to our solicitor fraternity, we say this: get it right, because these landlords are relying on us to support them through what is a major investment, not just for the interim rent that they're going to receive, but also for their investment for their pension. And that is a huge responsibility when you're taking care of somebody's financial pension pot. I see that as a very, very big requirement, that the legal advice does support people that are using private property and building their property portfolio. And we also, Charles and I know, we know Mark Alexander, don't we, from Property 118. Property 118 is a good friend of Shergroup and has a lot of resources on its platform as well for landlords. So we encourage landlords to take advantage of what Shergroup has to offer, Property 118 has to offer, and let's make sure that you're properly supported. And if you do have to do an eviction at the end of all of that process, then let's have it done by empathic enforcement professionals who will handle your tenant properly, put them out into the world of local authority rehousing, so that they can move from private property sector into local authority property sector with as little upset as possible. I mean, that has to be the way that we all want to go. So all of these changes, I mean, we're all trying to handle these government policies. I mean, I wish they would come and, you sometimes wish, don't you, that people would come and talk to people like us.
Yeah, people do it every day. Yeah, why not?
Yeah, that we actually understand the market and we actually understand the needs of landlords, and we can understand, as importantly, the needs of tenants.
Yeah,
you know, it's
yes.
a two-sided equation. So what else do you think, you know, if you were the housing minister, Charles, what would you do to put this right? I mean, what would be your game plan?
Well, and this is, you know, I wouldn't say that we are pro landlord or pro tenant. We're pro right, really, more than anything, you know. And it's, you know, what's right is right, you know, regardless. It might upset. It's going to upset one or the two parties, but that's all there is to it. But what I'm seeing all the time is that, or I'm hearing a lot from tenant sides, is that there's a dispute, and there's a lot of them. Police turn up and they're not willing to get involved because they treat it as a civil matter. And in my view, if you want to deal with forgetting this abolition, but if the government's intention is protection of tenants, then it should be about giving the police more teeth, making them treat landlord and tenant disputes as criminal as opposed to civil, because the landlords that they should be targeting, and I think they sort of kind of try to, even though this measure isn't, you know, they talk about rogue landlords and then put something in place like this, which is not, in my view, going to impact rogue landlords whatsoever. As I say, if they're not complying with the law already, why would they comply with the law once you change it? It's just not going to happen. In which case, if you're going after the rogue landlords, make them comply with the law. At the moment, they don't. The only thing they'll listen to are criminal sanctions, and if they listen to those. But you know, that's the only way. But until the government give the police the powers to you know, treat these things properly and I know police are stretched, I know they're overworked and things like that, but this is so important and it affects so many people in the country that I think that's the only way they're going to do it, is by making these whether it's the tenant in the wrong or the landlord, doesn't matter, but whoever is in the wrong, having them treated as criminal matters, not civil. It's the only way.
Yeah. I'd love to say that you'll have government policy on your side on that.
Yeah.
I think I don't see that happening.
Neither do I.
But I understand where you're coming from. But what I do say is that you hear a lot from a lot of landlords. You're talking to more and more landlords every day. I don't hear you say, "Oh, Claire, I came across another rogue landlord today." You know, what you say to me is, "I've seen another landlord today that didn't have his paperwork right."
Yeah, they don't exactly. Right. Exactly. And let's face it, you know, Shergroup traditionally were about law enforcement. We're enforcing laws. Yeah. So these rogue landlords are not falling over themselves to come to law enforcement, because that's not what they're doing. Do you know what I mean? In which case, if that is what the government are trying to tackle, what is the point in amending legislation? As you say, it's not about that. The people we act for and the people I speak to all the time are the people who are trying to get it right, who even believe they've got it right, but they haven't. And that's the problem. They're doing everything the right way, but they're being caught out because of the processes and the legislation and the way it's built. It targets the wrong people, but we're stopping those people that are we're trying to stop those people that are either doing it right or are trying to do it right. We're making sure they do it right, because, and you'll know better than I will, you know, there's nothing like looking at it not only from my side where people are trying to get evictions, looking at it from commercial points of view as well. When people contact us, the amount of times that people contact us, can you evict this person, you know, on a commercial basis, and the documentation's wrong, you know, and it's like, if they contact us earlier, like the fact that we are now like all service from day one, you know, from placement to eviction, means that I make sure that if it does go wrong and we have to go and enforce, I just go, yeah, you can do it. Here you go. Here's the documents. You can do it. Go and do it straight away. You know, you can forfeit the rent arrears straight away. Do it today. You know, cry whatever you want. Whereas what we're having to do now is we're having to get the papers from a solicitor or through whoever it is, have a look. They're asking us whether or not they can forfeit. It's like, well, we didn't draft it. You did. You tell us. And then we have to deal with it. So it just makes it so much more seamless if you can have it all, as you say, under one umbrella, which is obviously what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, there are other providers out there that do certainly all parts of what we do. I think how we're coming at it though, in terms of landlord and tenant law, which I haven't done that since I was at university. I know you do it every day now, but housing and tenant law and getting that law right is the bedrock really of what Charles is saying. And if the law is right and the paperwork is right, then landlords will have an easier time. Of course, we don't see rogue landlords, you know, and we wouldn't support a rogue landlord either. You know, if we saw a landlord rock up with, you know, definitely a dark side to what they're trying to do, then they're not going to be taken into the Shergroup system. I think that's fair to say. We would spot that and we would deal with it appropriately. And likewise with tenants, you may be listening to this and you may think, well, I'm a tenant, and you know, you've been talking about landlords all the way through this. We had a review not so long ago where one of our colleagues was commended for supporting a tenant in recovering a judgment against a bad landlord who had left the tenant and his family living in squalid conditions, and we had basically been able to recover the debt against that really rogue landlord. And so we can be a friend to tenants if they take their landlords to court and get judgments against them because they have not followed the rules. And the court make a monetary judgment against the landlord, monetary award for damages. Then we can enforce those types of judgments. So I think it's fair to say we're not judgy about where you are in the landlord and tenant arena, but what we want to do is help as many people as possible. And I feel in Charles we've got a very safe pair of hands that can steer you through this minefield of, you know, and I see this section 21 notice abolition coming up all the time. I'm a great Telegraph reader. It's in there nearly every week, telling landlords it's going to be, you know, terrible. But as you say, the government will adjust, and there'll still be justifications to remove tenants.
There has to be. I mean, as I say, even when I saw it, without reading any of the legislation, anything that they'd said,
yeah,
you know, I immediately looked at that headline and thought that is not possible. The implications of them doing that would be so great that they're just never going to do it. But of course, if they say, you know, asterisk, but that's not going to sell papers. So the fact of the matter is the headline policy is abolition of this. You're never going to be able to get your tenant out. It's just, as we said earlier about pensions. You know, there's this pension deficit that's not going away. That's only ever going to increase. Population is increasing. Why would they do something like prevent people from selling their properties and realising their asset in order to support their pension pot? Yeah. If that meant there was more pressure put on the government, just not going to happen.
No. So what we say is then, to conclude, I think, is if you're a landlord listening to this, don't watch TV shows about, you know, how to handle tenants and get them out. Come and use our legal clinic service. It's on our website at shergroup.com under legal solutions. Book a half an hour with Charles and get him to review your current situation, your current paperwork, right, Charles? And get him to come and talk to you. Yeah. And it's easy to do. You can just pay for it up front, book it on our website, and then Charles will take a look at it for you. Now, it may mean that he has to then dig deeper and then he'll talk to you about, you know, what that's going to cost. But just to get a half-hour advice, a thorough review, which can be done in half an hour, a good review can be done in half an hour, and then really starting to put you on the right track, I think is well worth it.
And you won't, just so they know, they won't. We're not people that will. I'm not there to spend half an hour telling you what the problems are and then get you on as a client to tell you how to deal with them. I will tell you, and I will give you an email, and it will tell you what your problems are, and I will tell you what the results of those problems are, and I will tell you how we can we can deal with them. If you then decide to take that information to another lawyer to deal with it or do it yourself, at least I know that you're on the right path and you're going to be able to, you understand how to deal with the issues and what the implications are. If you want me to deal with them, again, that's great. But that's important to me. I'm not just here to tell you the bad news. It's to tell you how to get you out of it as well.
And that's very important too, because we've seen him do that numerous times now with landlords who've come to us, you know, who are pretty desperate, trying to understand. Actually, I had a family member not so long ago who just sent a simple message, you know, could you have a look at this for me? And I think you basically unpacked all of that and put that family member on the right track. So we, you know, we're here to help our community. We're here to help landlords, and if we can help tenants where we can, we will as well. So take advantage of what Shergroup has to offer. We're going to ask Charles to come back and talk to us as a regular guest on Shergroup on the Sofa, because he's got, you know, a ton of experience, and this is a great channel for him to share it on. So if you have specific problems that you would like our resident expert to solve for you, I'm going to pitch it out there, then let's have a look at those, and please send them in to us. You can send them in at hub@shergroup.com. You know, I have a question for Charles, and let's see if he can answer it for you. I bet you he can. I've almost put my faith that he can. Such is my faith in him.
Thank you, Claire.
But if he can't, then that he'll go and look it up for you. That's the other great thing. He, you know, he will check it out. I don't think there's anything that's going to faze him. So take advantage of that. If you're sitting there listening to this and you're thinking, I don't know what to do. I'm a landlord and I'm really stuck. Don't be stuck. Shergroup will give you a way through. Okay. So Charles, thank you so much for coming on Shergroup on the Sofa. It's great to see you here. I've been trying to get him here for a little while. He's a hell of a busy. So I just got him to come along today and make his first appearance. For everyone else out there, Charles's contact details will be in the show notes to this little TV segment, and all the contact details will be there as well. So just you can check us out on all our channels, all the socials and YouTube, and you can come to our website at shergroup.com and you can chat to us on our website. You can email us at hub@shergroup.com. Again, we make it really easy to engage in everything that we're doing. So reach out to us if you need us, okay? Don't suffer in silence. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Great to see you, Charles. And we'll see you again. Goodbye, everyone. Have a great rest of the week. Thank you. Bye-bye.